All right, Lauren, thanks for continuing the conversation. Just in case someone didn't hear the previous video, can you go ahead and introduce yourself again?
Absolutely. So my name is Lauren Wag. I'm a therapist at Colorado Teen Therapy located just outside of Denver. We work with kids ages like 10 to 21 for a wide variety of issues. Some just come in with like normal teen struggles. Some come in with like significant depression, anxiety, social anxiety, things like that. And then I've kind of fallen into working with kids with eating disorders. And so working on whether it's disordered eating, eating disorder, just like a diet culture mentality, parsing through like how people feel about their bodies and food and what their relationships are like with those. Um, and sometimes we're working as a team with, dietitians, medical doctors, and ourselves as therapists. And sometimes it's just us. And I've really, really found I really enjoy working with the eating disorder population, and I've been able to learn a lot, which I'm really grateful for.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you, Lauren, talking about like a subject that's so near and dear to my heart and yours. And specifically today, talking about teens with you, like having this passion working with teens. I want to speak specifically to that and some of the struggles that they encounter when they're going through healing their relationship with food and body and possibly healing from an eating disorder. And this video specifically, I'd love to chat about something that comes up a lot for me, and I know probably a lot for you, for your clients, is this relationship when people are on their road to recovery, whether from an eating disorder or disordered eating. It's very confusing when it comes to observing other people's relationship with food, other people who might be dieting, things that they hear from people who are really close to them, sisters, brothers, friends, parents, loved ones, and from doctors as well. So I'm curious, do you see that pretty often?
Yes, almost. I think with every teen that's struggling with an eating disorder, they have someone else in their life who has their own relationship with disordered eating or an eating disorder or kind of just like a diet mentality. And it's really hard to, I've seen a big struggle of like teens who are like, I'm putting all this work into myself and healing myself. And why is no one else around me doing that? Like, why do I have to get better when like my mom can still diet or I can still see like just like people around me skipping meals and things like that. And so um, I think it's a really important part of the recovery journey to talk about because it is like we do not exist as like singular beings. We exist within communities and thrive on connection. And it's hard when those connections kind of reintegrate disordered eating into your life when you're trying really hard to separate from it.
Yeah, and it's just that's such a tough struggle of working so hard, like you said, working so hard to recover, um, but then seeing just people around you who might not be there with their relationship with food or not trying to work on their relationship with food or it didn't get to a place where they feel like it's impacting their life much. So it's really tricky, it's really confusing, and I usually like start that conversation out a lot with this idea that if you were in a room and you were to kind of read out Carolyn Costin's definition of what is recovery to a room full of people, and the definition she uses is just that you no longer use eating disorder behaviors to cope with things. You have a very self-compassionate relationship with your body and a trusting relationship with food. And if you were to ask a room full of people with that, no one in that room might have a diagnosable eating disorder, but I bet if you ask people to raise their hands and say who's there, many people would not be raising their hands. So that's really difficult because that's the world we live in, and we're trying to recover in that world. So I find a lot of people saying that when they are trying to heal their relationship with food and when they're coming in across these things and experiencing these things, which most people do, they have a hard time with kind of leaning into full recovery when they feel like if they do that, they will feel out of place and unable to connect with people around them. Whether it's their parents who they are consistently eating with on a daily basis, or friends that who are dabbling in diets and shaming their body and trying to change their body. Do you see that? And what would be your advice for that?
Yes, definitely see that because it's no one likes isolation or not feeling included. And I think like it's really easy to feel included when we're all like I saw a post the other day that's like diet culture talk on Monday mornings, like, oh, I ate so bad this weekend. I like diet starts tomorrow, things like that. And so it kind of you feel excluded if you don't engage in that, but it's really unhealthy for someone who has an eating disorder because it just reaffirms those ideas in their head that they can't have a healthy relationship with food or trust their bodies. And so stepping out of those conversations is so important. And it's hard, but I think like learning skills to be able to do that, like either naming like, hey, this isn't really a helpful conversation for me to have right now. Um, and naming that to everyone if you feel comfortable and safe, or even saying like, this isn't a great way to view our bodies or like our relationships with food. And like, it's awesome that you ate a cupcake last night. You probably enjoyed your son's birthday a lot. Um, and helping others reframe that if you're in a space to do so. And if you're not in a space to help others with their relationship with food, simply stepping out of the conversation of saying like, oh, I'm going to like go grab something, or like this conversation's not helpful for me. Like I'm going to take myself out of it. And it does feel, um, it's hard, and it does feel a little isolating at first, but I think in my own experience of like learning my own relationship with food and working in places that where other people don't, like at lunch at one of my previous jobs, like everyone would talk about like how unhealthy their food was or how unhealthy they ate last night. And I started to like kind of drop little things of like, oh, I actually really love pizza and like really enjoy eating it. Or like, yeah, I had a donut this morning and it was great because that's what I wanted. And starting to normalize food into those conversations, and actually hearing those conversations shift within the workplace of like, yeah, I had like pizza last night and I loved it. And hearing, just by dropping those little things and like starting to change the narrative yourself, you can help others make that shift as well. And if anything, it just helps shift the conversation away from like, I have to go on a diet or I can't eat certain foods.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I love that approach. And I think the thing is that everyone's at a really different place in what they're able to do or what they feel comfortable doing in those situations. And really, so
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have to think of for yourself what feels most comfortable. Is it simply walking away? Is it nodding at the conversation? And if you're not at a place where you can walk away from it or want to, um, do you feel safe enough where you would like to advocate for yourself? And how does that look?
Mm-hmm.
How can you do that safely and comfortably? And sometimes too, do you think you can act? How can you empower yourself in that situation and actually speak up and like you did and say like, well, I actually really like pizza. And do you want to hear a little bit about health at every size and diet culture? Some people can
Yes.
be at that point too, but yeah, I would say you kind of have to think of where you're at in your journey, because number
Mm-hmm.
one, you have to protect your recovery first. And I feel that when you are at a place where you can fully heal your relationship with food and body, then you can approach those conversations a lot more trusting and comfortable. And then no matter how someone else reacts, you can be pretty comfortable with accepting how their reaction and still feeling safe and strong in your recovery. Um,
Yeah.
what I speak to a lot with people too is a lot of adolescents is how cool would it be, like a lot of your friends like that you see that are in that you can see they are in pain with feeling shameful of their body and feeling like they need to change it and manipulate food. How cool would it be for them to have a role model who is modeling a good relationship with these things and to look back on? I know growing up when I was in disordered eating and my eating disorder, those who had a trusting relationship, I was really like in awe of how do they do that? That is so cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think having those positive role models and kind of like what we talked about in our social media and presentation, just like surrounding yourself with people who help you get to where you want to be, and being able to look up to um, just adults that have healthy relationships with food and don't tell you that your body size defines your worth or things like that, or how you eat says anything about you, because it doesn't. It says something about what you're craving and like what your taste preferences. And so just surrounding yourself and like especially for teens, like I say, like, why don't you talk to mom about her relationship with food, or talk to dad or talk to sibling and say like, hey, like when you say these things about food, this is how I feel, and
Mm-hmm.
that reminds me a lot of my eating disorder. um, and if it feels safe, like bring them into a session and like all together say like, like mom or dad or whatever family member it is, like would it be helpful for you to take a look at like your relationship with food? And like, I think having a teen with mental health struggles is hard to parent. It is so difficult and so like parents, like absolutely get your own therapist, like absolutely have your own outlets to talk about these things, because being a parent is hard. And then parenting a teen with an eating disorder or mental illness is also really hard. And so being able to talk through your own feelings and experiences as well, and looking internally is really important.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's tough when you are, uh, an adolescent growing up in a home with, everyone has a different relationship with food, and working on your relationship with food might spark something in someone else, or like some wounds that someone else has with the relationship with food, or just different opinions and different ideas, and that's where it gets really tricky. I do have something I really like to share with parents, and so teens watching this, if they'd like to share that with parents, it's just how helpful ways to talk about food and body image at home, in very just gentle ways. And there's a little bit of some links to some starter like education on what is health at every size, what is intuitive eating, and so I can find a way to link that. I don't know how yet, but I can find a way to link that to there too. So hopefully that can be a little helpful. Um, so Lauren, one further question. I'm curious. So we chatted about friends and their relationship with food and family members and kind of what to do to protect your recovery. What would you say for, if the teen goes to their doctor and their doctor talks about what is healthy food versus unhealthy food, or, starts giving nutrition advice, or, talks about BMI, what would you say?
um I think for the teen, like being strong in that, like bringing that to your team and processing it there, and um, hopefully you have a team that you trust and can talk through like how those things make you uncomfortable, and kind of parse out like what that brought up for you, like when your doctor said mentioned BMI or was like exhibiting weight bias or things like that, like what that made you feel about yourself and your recovery and things like that. um, and also like maybe if like the doctor has a communication with your treatment team or your parents, things like that, like talking to your parents about how it made you feel, and letting the adults like bring that back to the doctor and say like, hey, like, I've heard this isn't helpful when you say this to teens. It can actually be really damaging, especially in kids with eating disorders. um, and so not putting that education on the teens themselves when that's not a place they're um, necessarily have to be in, like allowing the adults to handle that and to kind of reach back out and give feedback to those professionals, because I think like as mental health professionals, medical professionals, we should all have an obligation to meet our clients where they're at, and eliminate like weight bias and kind of those diet culture mentalities that we all have our like we're taught ourselves growing up. And so like going to professional development workshops or webinars, or just educating ourselves as professionals, to better treat and meet people where they're at with eating disorders, disordered eating, just like consistent dieting. And so teens like don't take that and say like, oh, like my doctor thinks I'm fat, or my doctor thinks this about me, or my doctor doesn't eat these foods, so I shouldn't either, because they are trusted professionals. But instead, like talk, just like don't stop talking about it, like bring it to your therapist, your dietitian, your parents, and ask them if they can do something about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that, because that is not on the teen or the person. They shouldn't have to do the education, but unfortunately, again, kind of what we were chatting on, we live in this world where there is much talk about good food, good bodies, bad bodies, all of that,
Hmm.
harmful, what I would say, ignorant
Yeah.
conversation, and harmful conversation, and everyone's at a different place. Everyone, we have to respect other people's opinions, but you have to also know that you deserve the best care. And if that's something that doesn't make you feel comfortable, you have every right to feel that way. Of course, you would feel that way. And you can't, if you're not in the place to advocate for yourself, you shouldn't have to. And especially teens, we can bring that to parents and bring that to treatment team. A lot of times, I tell my clients, and I will chat with their doctor before they even go see them, but you're working with tell them you're working with a dietitian. You are chatting with your dietitian about nutrition and health, being healthy, and what that is and what that means for them. And so that's not a conversation that they need to have with their doctor, because they're getting that on a weekly basis. So just to bring it back to their team, to do that education on health at every
Mhm.
size and eating disorders, and so they can do that on behalf of their client, to advocate for them. So yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. But it is hard. It's hard, and it's yeah, it's difficult.
it's really hard. And like, it's okay to feel the hard feelings about it, because
Yes.
it's like painful when people say those things to us.
Yes, it's very painful. So of course, like you said, you just it's not okay. We're sorry that that happened, and also like let's process through it, because most likely it's gonna happen again. It's gonna come up again, because that thing we keep coming back to is just because that's kind of the world we live in, and we have to see how we can, for ourselves, self-compassionately navigate that in a healthy way that protects our recovery and our relationship with food and body that we want. So
Hmm.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I do have to go, but is there anything you'd like to add before
No,
we head
I
out?
think no, I think we're all set. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I loved all your advice, and yeah, we'll have another conversation soon, I'm sure.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thanks.
awesome. Bye.